You ever wonder how different cultures have tried to, map out the entire human family? Well, today we're going to dive into a really unique document, a 20th century Persian history book that tries to do exactly that. So let's unpack this fascinating attempt to map all of humanity.
Right, so that's the big question here. How did they do it? We're going to pull this historical text apart, piece by piece, to understand its unique map of the world, the categories it used, and the very specific story it's trying to tell about where we all come from. It's really about getting inside the mind of a historian from a different time and a different place.
And here it is. This is a page straight from the book itself. Think of it like a window, a direct look into a worldview from a totally different era, a way of seeing the world that might feel pretty unfamiliar to us now. We're going to break this down together.
All right, so where do you even begin with something this massive? Well, for this author, it all starts by dividing all of humanity into 5 big fundamental groups. This is kind of the first layer, the big picture, before things get much more detailed.
So here are the 5 groups. You've got white, yellow, red, and black, mostly based on color. And then a 5th one, Malay. But here's where it gets really interesting. After laying all this out, the author pretty much ignores 4 of them and just lasers in on 1. And that choice? Well, it tells you a whole lot about the story he really wants to tell.
And just like that, the whole focus shifts. The text takes that one category, the white race source Safed Pust, and says, hold on, this group isn't just one thing. Nope. According to the author, it's actually made up of 3 totally distinct ancient lineages. This is where the real story starts to unfold.
So what are these 3 branches? The text calls them the Hamitic, the Semitic, and the Indo-European peoples. And right there, that's a huge clue into the book's whole point of view. For this author, to understand world history, especially ancient history, you have to understand the origins and movements of these 3 specific groups.
Okay, so let's just go with it. We'll follow the author's logic here and look at each of these branches one by one. We'll start with how the book describes the Hamitic and Semitic peoples before we get to the group that receives, by far, the most detailed attention, the Indo-Europeans.
So for the first 2 branches, the Hamitic and Semitic, the book explains them mostly through a story about geography and migration. It paints this picture of 2 separate families starting out in different parts of the ancient world, and then spreading out across North Africa and the Middle East.
And you can see that breakdown right here. On the left, you've got the Hamitic peoples. The author says they came from Asia and moved into North Africa. Then on the right, the Semitic peoples with origins in Arabia and Mesopotamia. The book even names specific ancient peoples for each branch to, fill out its map. But like I said, this is all just the warm-up for the main event.
All right, and now we get to it, the 3rd and final branch, the Indo-Europeans. And honestly, this is what the whole book is really about. The author dedicates so much space to telling this incredibly detailed origin story for this group, presenting them as a single people who set off on a journey that would change the world.
And for the author, everything hinges on this single point of origin. The book pinpoints the homeland to the shores of the Volga River. And from that one spot, it claims, this massive migration kicked off. A migration that would eventually splinter and spread out to form many of the peoples of Europe and Asia. And look at this. Here is the original text again. This is the list of what happened after that big dispersal. The author argues that from that one single migration, 8 totally distinct subgroups or branches of the Indo-European family were created.
So here we are. This is the final layer, the most detailed breakdown in the whole document. It's basically the author's family tree for the Indo-European lineage, broken down into 8 major branches.
Okay, so let's look at the list. The text puts the Aryans, which in this context refers to the Indo-Iranian peoples, right at the top. And from there, the list basically moves west. You've got Greeks and Macedonians, Armenians, Albanians, Italians, Celts, Germans, and finally Lithuanians and Slavs. This detailed list, right here, forms the absolute core of the book's entire historical story.
Okay, so after unpacking this entire system, what does a map like this really tell us? Because look, the point isn't to ask if this is scientifically right by today's standards. Of course not. The real question is, what kind of worldview does something like this reveal?
What we've been looking at is a historical artifact. It's a snapshot in time, one very specific attempt to create order and tell a grand story about human history. It tells a story of origins, migrations, and connections, all structured from the unique perspective of its author and their time.
And that kind of leaves us with one last thing to think about. These kinds of historical maps, whether they're about people or borders, they do more than just describe the past. They actually help create the stories we tell about ourselves. So the real question is, how do these narratives from the past
continue to shape our understanding of identity and community